The views and opinions expressed are that of the individuals and are not the reflections of any Grand Masonic body. The goal in this video series is to enlighten the minds of our viewers with Masonic education for the modern Freemason, wherever they might be. Take due notice thereof and govern yourselves accordingly. This is Modern Working Tools, today's tools for the modern Freemason. I am your host, Brother Justice, broadcasting live from Barrington 522 in Barrington, Illinois. Hello, my name is Brother Justice, Modern Working Tools here at Barrington 522 in Barrington, Illinois, the Grand Lodge of Illinois, Ancient Free and Accepted Masons. And I have a very special guest here. I have Brother Robert Cooper, who is the curator of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, their library, and he's a custodian of many unique and rare artifacts in their possession. It's an honor to have you on the show. I hope you're doing well, brother. Nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to talking with you here and educating more of our brethren into where Illinois Freemasonry comes from, our ritual. Also, I want to take this and expand it to outside of my jurisdiction of Illinois, and I want to highlight notable Masons from elsewhere too. And it's really awesome to have you on. Thank you.
Good.
So, to start out here, can you tell us a little bit about your Masonic background and record, how you got started in the fraternity, your mother lodge, and sort of that whole experience?
Yeah, okay. Well, my background, and this will probably come through as we progress. My background, my academic background is in history, specifically classic Greek history, not language, but classic Greek history, Pericles, etc., etc. And so, I've always been interested in history. So books started to appear which were giving a very unusual history of my country, Scotland. And it was certainly not a history that I'd ever heard at school or college or university. So I thought, well, what is this alternative hidden history about Scotland? So that was one of the motivations for joining Freemasonry, to find out what it was all about. So that was the real reason. A lot of guys in Scotland join because their father, grandfather, etc., were Freemasons, or because it's got a very prominent part in the local community, particularly in the rural areas. But that was not me. I joined from a purely kind of curiosity angle. So that's why I joined. And one of the problems that I immediately had was, as soon as I made people aware that I was interested, I got all these kind of approaches. Well, you could join my lodge, or you could join my lodge. And in Edinburgh, which is the capital of Scotland, we have, at that time, we had in excess of 40 lodges in a population of 500,000. So 40 lodges to choose from was quite a lot. Anyway, I didn't know, anything about it. So my mother lodge is the Lodge of Light, 1656, which still exists here in Edinburgh. So I was initiated, passed, and raised in that lodge, the Lodge of Light. And unusually, for a lot of Scots, the marked degree can be taken in Craft Lodge and the Royal Arch chapter. So I was one of the unusual people in that I took the Royal Arch, the mark and the Royal Arch degrees in the Royal Arch chapter. And that tends to be the next step after the Craft Lodges. Then I progressed to becoming a founder member of Lodge Edinburgh Castle, number 1764. Of which I was master in 1998. I then joined Lodge Quater Coronati, which is an invitation-only lodge, the oldest lodge of research in the world, meets in London. in the premises of the Grand Lodge of England. So that was kind of like a high point in terms of the research and exposure to some very eminent academic historians that are around in Britain at the moment. So that's a kind of brief resume or brief story of my kind of Masonic life. But of course, my actual professional position is, as you say, as curator of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. And I took up that position in June 1974. So it was quite, it was just simply an accident, but I became member. So that's what, in excess of 27 years ago now, that I took that position. And it's one of those lucky situations where I'm actually employed to do something I enjoy doing. So not only do I have employment, but I have a vocation, and that's kind of neat. And that's one of the reasons I've kind of hung in there for so long. A lot of people would say 27 years in one job is far too long. But when you're enjoying it, hey, as you said earlier, if it ain't broke, why fix it? And that's exactly the scenario with me. And so I'm still in there, still enjoying it, despite the pandemic, still a lot going on. Yeah, I'm just having good fun, basically.
One thing is too, this shows a perfect example of you get out of the craft what you put in. So this story could definitely be inspirational to other Freemasons who are very dedicated into the history and the artifacts. There is a place for people like us in our fraternity. It's not just always about the social aspect. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's something else going on as well. There's philosophy, there's allegory, there's a little hint of spirituality in these degrees, and it's a mystic tie. And I think we definitely need to explore that realm a little bit more. Now, you did mention that you're very active, but what about appendant bodies? How are the appendant bodies working in Scotland?
Yeah, well, we have them all, I think, except for the likes of the Shriners. We don't have them. There's a few other things that we don't have, the kind of perhaps the smaller ones. So we don't have any female organizations like the Rainbow Girls, nor do we have things like the Cedar of Lebanon. Nor do we have the Knights of St. Andrew, which you would think would be Scottish. But so it's a service organization, I think we have in the US. So we have everything else. But to be honest, the activity at craft level is so, in some instances, it's frantic. As I mentioned earlier, with 40 lodges in Edinburgh, you've only got maximum 31 days a month. So it's actually possible, if you try hard enough, to attend 8 lodges in a week here. So you could attend a lodge every weekday from Monday to Friday, and 2 on a Saturday morning, a Saturday afternoon. And if you find one in the Saturday evening, you could actually attend 9 meetings a week. There are no meetings on Sunday. So you can see from that, a huge amount of our activity is at lodge level. So although we have all the other orders, a lot of people are very happy to stay at the level of the craft lodge, because there's so much going on, they don't have time to do very much else. So they might join the appendant bodies, but their heart lies very much at the lodge level. So it's different in Scotland, I think. That's what I'm saying.
And do you think because every lodge has a different version or variance of the work, is that a contribution to the activity of Blue Lodge members there?
Very much so. It's one of these things, when I go to other countries, particularly say England, where there's a tendency to use one ritual and one ritual only. The regalia is all the same color, the same design, etc., etc. Scotland couldn't be more different. So if you're in England and you go to 3 degrees, then you'll hear almost exactly word for word, first, second, and third degree, the same, whichever lodge you go to. And so eventually, a lot of people might say, well, yeah, I'm not really interested in going to the lodge because I've heard it all many, many times. So there's nothing new. Whereas in Scotland, because every lodge can devise its own ritual, within reason, of course, it can devise its own ritual. What happens is when you visit, and visiting is a very big part of Scottish Freemasonry, where frequently lodges will visit other lodges on a very regular basis. And that means that you then are exposed to that different ritual worked by a lodge which may actually meet in the same building as you, but they have a different ritual. So it means that you're almost guaranteed to see and hear something different from your own lodge. And so that's an attraction, and that tends to keep the activity moving. Whereas, as I say, in some parts of the world, people perhaps unjustly get a little bit bored by hearing the same thing.
No, it's no secret that in our fraternity, you know, we don't discuss politics and religion, but sometimes the way we operate lodges can be run almost like a business, and
Mm,
sometimes there is political things that
mm,
happen. You know,
mm,
the hierarchies and voting, and sometimes it can appear political. Now, since there's different versions of the rituals and things, is there any, sometimes conflicts that arises from lodge to lodge or competition between lodges? For instance, here in my jurisdiction, we have awards given out annually for, lodges who hit certain expectations from the Grand Lodge, who exceeded or met the expectations. Is there sometimes competition, friendly competition between lodges and things like that?
No, I don't think we've got anything like that. What we tend to have is you have lodges here who may have a golf tournament every year
Okay.
or a bowling tournament, and that's where the kind of competitive activity goes. So no, we don't have that kind of business-like approach. And I suspect this is all to do with our history because there was, at the time the Grand Lodge was founded, there was in excess of 100 lodges already in existence. So that meant that Grand Lodge grew out of lodges.
Mm.
Instead of in lots of other countries, Grand Lodge was established very early on and they chartered daughter lodges. It worked in reverse in Scotland. As well as that, there's a very huge democratic element involved in Scotland. So Grand Lodge meets 4 times a year, not once, like in many parts of the United States.
Right.
So that means that decisions, unpopular decisions, can be reversed quite quickly by within 3 months, because a meeting will come along of Grand Lodge who then scrutinize what the executive have done in the last 3 months and check, whether they like what's been done or not. And the same pattern cascades down through Grand Lodge, provincial, which I think you call district level, and down to basic lodges. So every office bearer, we call them, every office bearer at all 3 levels have to be nominated and elected every year, right up to the Grand Master. So that includes the wardens at lodge level, the wardens at Grand Lodge level. They all have to be nominated and elected every year. So even although our Grand Master will serve typically 5 years or more, sometimes he's still got to be elected every year. So it's a different way of doing the same thing, but it's not done. It's run as a much more as a fraternity, I think, rather than as a business, which leads to all sorts of other problems, I have to say, because it's not a business, then you have people who are not businessmen running the finances.
Mm.
So,
Now, you did mention intervisitation between the brethren in Scotland. So that leads me to believe, do you guys not have dues cards there? Everyone kind of knows each other. Is that sort of the deal? Because I know in Ireland it's similar. I was told that they didn't have dues cards.
Yeah,
So,
no, we don't. We're very old-fashioned, I suppose, in that sense, very traditional. So what will happen is, I mean, most lodges you go to, everybody, because, for example, the regalia is different for every lodge, you can immediately tell from the guy's apron that he's not from your lodge for sure. You can tell that right away. And if nobody recognizes the regalia, that's the first red flag. You know, who is this guy? He's not wearing the right or the regalia we recognize. And so then he's usually taken aside by a past master of the lodge, and he's tested on his Masonic knowledge. And if he passes the test, he's admitted. Now, I do know, and in fact, a fairly recent example, I have to say, was one of your countrymen who was very high in the Scottish Rite, but had obviously forgotten all his craft lodge stuff, and he couldn't pass the test. We didn't let him in. So he wasn't very happy about that, but he couldn't produce the goods on the night, so he wasn't allowed into the lodge.
Yeah, every state has their own different variances. I know Pennsylvania has their own weird things of weird way of doing things. Here in Illinois, though, it's not uncommon. Also in Michigan, when I visited Michigan, to show your credentials and still get tested. So we kind of do both. But it's the prerogative of the worshipful master. He could decide if he wants to be formal or informal. But usually they'll I think they just want to see you at the altar giving signs. I think they just want to see it. So
Yeah.
it is tradition and it is beautiful, and I don't mind doing it. But yeah,
Sure.
here we have a dues card, and we also get travel papers from the Grand Secretary. Here in Illinois, if you're a member of any committee or what have you, we're not allowed per se to contact other grand officials. There's a hierarchy. We go through the Grand Secretary, and the Grand Secretary will facilitate visitation, and you will get a letter in the mail with a seal and a note saying this is the brother in good standing, in addition with your dues card. And usually with travel, it's recommended that we contact the lodge that we're visiting in advance, 2 to 3 weeks.
Sure. Sure.
So just to let them know. But
yeah. We do the same. I think if you're going to another country, obviously, that comes into play as well.
Now, you did mention that you are the curator of some of the artifacts there. Can we talk a little bit more about the artifacts? I know you are the custodian of some of the oldest lodge records in the world, dating back to 1599, the St. Clair Charter, Shaw statutes. These are 15th to 16th century. So if we could talk a little bit about some of the artifacts as well, because I know that you do have some items from the British Crown and things like that. So can you enlighten us what you have?
I mean, to be honest, it is a problem, but it's a very nice problem to have. And it's a problem because of the age of the craft in Scotland. The oldest lodge records, and I'm extremely interested, I have to say, in the pre-Grand Lodge material. So everything before 1717 is what I'm interested in. And I have to say that nearly everything prior to 1717 is Scottish. So of course, 1717 is a very important date, but it's just one date amongst many, in the sense that it was the formation of the Grand Lodge, the first Grand Lodge, in 1717. But there was a huge amount of stuff going on here in Scotland before that, for more than 100 years prior to the first Grand Lodge. So finding that kind of information, that kind of documentation is fascinating. And this leads me perhaps back to my kind of academic career, because as a historian, there is a certain methodology of how you look at the past and how you treat material, and there's a constant demand for evidence rather than simply opinion. So I'm custodian, I should say, of a lot of this very early stuff, the first minutes, for example, is a minute book of a lodge called Aitchison's Haven, which you probably haven't heard of because it doesn't exist anymore. But their minutes begin on the 9th of January, 1599, and they lasted up until 1850. Likewise, the first minutes of a lodge which is still in existence are the minutes of the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel #1, and their minutes begin on the 31st of July, oddly enough, today in 1599. So how long ago is that? Today? That is exactly, I'll get my arithmetic hat on, that's 1600, so 300, 400, 420, 421 years, 422 years. It's a long time ago. And what is more important in that sense is that although they begin in 1599, they are continuous. Every single meeting from 1599 is recorded in that lodge's records right up to the present day. Every meeting, every initiate, every fellow craft, every master mason is recorded there, as well as all the usual business stuff.
Like the Stanley Cup of lodge records, it sounds.
Yeah, it's in the Guinness Book of Records, actually.
Stanley was a Mason.
Yeah, there you go.
Really,
yeah.
And
so
you etch out every year the members of the team that won. So how big is this document? Is it fairly large?
Well, no, it's divided into minute books, and every book maybe covers 20, 30 years. So there's a lot of books. But of course, in those days, they were not writing for you and I. They were writing for themselves. And they were really just keeping track of what they were doing from generation to generation, as well as from meeting to meeting. So they wanted to know, when Justin joined the lodge, they could look back in the minute books and say, oh yeah, he's been around for 20 odd years or whatever. So they were writing for themselves. They weren't writing for historians. And that, it's good that they did that, but in some ways it causes us a problem as historians because there's a lot of things they don't say. So they don't say a lot about the ritual, for example. They just say that the degrees were conferred, but they tell you nothing about the lodge layout. There's nothing about the artifacts they would use, and there's no revelations of the secrets that could be around. No words, no hands, nothing like that. It's just a kind of business record of what they did on a particular night, and if they got new members, they would mention him by name. So it's good, but compared to what we know today in terms of our own records, they were being very brief, shall we put it that way. Yeah.
Since we're on the topic of records, can you explain to me like a little bit of your day-to-day? So let's pretend hypothetically that you're going to Grand Lodge tomorrow. What would be your duties and responsibilities that you would carry out on a day-to-day there?
Okay, well, the first problem is every single day is different. Every single day, and sometimes the day, well, not sometimes, but regularly, the day passes in a flash. I'm usually in the office very early, before 7:30 in the morning, after 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm there until whenever I'm needed. So typically I'll go home in late afternoon, but inevitably in this day and age, the first thing we do is check the emails. We get emails, and it is a fantastic way to communicate. But when I became curator, we were still sending letters through the mail to each other. So I remember the analog days rather than the digital days, So email is a boon, but it can also be a curse because people know that they've sent you a message and they know you've got it. And so, you can't say your letter's not arrived yet, so you don't have much wriggle room in terms of replying. And of course, we get inquiries from all over the world. So emails take up a lot of time. People checking for ancestors, because our records go back more than 400 years. Not terribly comprehensive before Grand Lodge, but when Grand Lodge comes along, they are very much more complete. So people trying to track down their Masonic ancestors is quite a common thing for us. As well as that, we get all sorts of other inquiries by email about the ritual, about symbolism, about things that people want to read for their own education, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, today, things like Zoom meetings are a very regular occurrence for me now. Of course, before I would just go to a lodge, whether it was in the United States or here in Scotland, I would just go to a lodge and give a presentation. Now, a lot of it is by this method over Zoom. So that's made my life busier as well, because people think, oh, we don't need to get them to come to the lodge. We'll just get them to come along and log onto our Zoom account and off we go. So that's kind of nice, but it makes my life busier in that sense. Then, of course, because I'm looking after a museum, library, and archives, I've got those three specialisms to learn about. But I'm a historian, so I'm not a librarian, I'm not a curator, museum curator, I'm a little bit of an archivist. So, from the fact that I took my university degrees in history, then a lot of people think, well, you know about old stuff, you can come and look after our old stuff, and I think, okay, so that's basically how I got the job, because I know about old stuff. But it's been a fascinating journey, I have to say. But every day is different, every day is busy. Now, never have a quiet day. So even now, when lodges aren't meeting, I'm as busy as I ever have been when lodges are actually meeting. So, the pandemic really doesn't affect me that much. I'm busy one way or the other.
I like to consider these, modern working tools. In ancient times, they gave us, a plumb, a level, a trowel. Now it's Zoom, your smartphone, your email,
Yep.
electronic communications. I like to look at these as our modern working tools, and I feel that we should be utilizing these to further enhance our experience in the fraternity in the digital age, and also bring us into another generation 100 years from now, 200 years from now. So when you're using your modern working tools now, how do you go about it? So you are archivist. Are you digitizing documents over there? Are you rebinding books, or are you preserving them a certain way? How are you going about using these modern working tools in your endeavors?
Okay. Well, first, before we go into that actual question, you're absolutely right about things like Zoom. And a lot of people say, well, it's no substitute for a lodge meeting. That's true, but it's opened all sorts of other doors. So, I mean, when you go to a lodge meeting and you have something to eat and you've got the degree and all the rest of it, there's not often very much time to sit and talk like we are just now.
Right.
So that's where Zoom fills something that was missing before the pandemic. And I'm hoping that Zoom and the other platforms that can be used in this way will continue to be used, because I think it's a huge educational tool that we never had, or if we had it, we never used it before the pandemic comes along. So now that we've experienced how useful it is, let's hope that we continue to use these modern working tools, as you say. So, yeah, in terms of the modern days, and I do remember, as I said, the kind of analog days where digitization, well, the only kind of digitization that you had was photocopying, basically, or photography, to reproduce documents. So I think people are still got Xerox copies of some books and things like that. But now, of course, scanning electronically, scanning things is the big thing. And so we started what we call our digitization project about 15, 16 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And the reason for that was because I was very concerned that 400 years of records inevitably are going to wear out if we keep using them. So what we've done is, and I'm looking at our membership records in particular, the early minute books, etc. So we're scanning all our what we would call source material, historical source material, the very basic information that allows us to build some idea of what happened in the past. So we've started to scan all our membership records. Now, the problem with that is that these are physically very large books. Typically 18 inches wide by 12 inches tall and about 6 inches thick. And they contain over 1,000 pages in each. So physically, they're extremely heavy to move around. So from a sort of physical point of view, having them digitally copied was a good idea. And then, of course, what we've done is that's now all on hard drives, on secure hard drives, and the actual physical book is very rarely used anymore. We look at this stuff on a monitor, on a computer screen. So that's the big chunk, and we're now up to 1962 in terms of the records. We've got 50 odd years, 60 years to go before that's complete. But so that means essentially we've done 360 years of records. So I'm quite pleased with that. But of course, that's just one part of the archive. There's huge amounts of other stuff. So all the Grand Lodge records, their minute books, both written, handwritten, and then later printed, they've all got to be scanned. Then all our what we call constitution and laws, the kind of legalistic, bureaucratic stuff. Then we've got all sorts of other things. We've got lots of rare books that there's some that only one known copy exists in the world, so we've got that kind of information as well, but that's got to be a bit down the line, because to me anyway, as a historian, it's our membership records that are most important first.
Now, I started, I've been at it for about a week now, but I started as the assistant librarian at my local Scottish Rite Valley here in the Valley of Chicago. And shout out to the librarian, Brother Carl Peterson. He's a big fan of your work, and he's going to be thrilled to see this episode when we publish it here. But he let me in the vault in the back room, and I did find a book given by the Grand Lodge of Scotland. It was presented to one of our Grand Masters here, John Corson Smith. He was a Civil War general in Galena, Illinois. He was a very learned Mason. He wrote a short history of Illinois Freemasonry, but he was also in the second Ars Coronati volume. He's listed as a correspondence member. And the Grand Lodge of Scotland did give him a book that's a directory of all the titles they had in their library. I'll send you a photo of that on the email.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool, and I thought about you when I seen it. It was a beautiful. But yeah, that's awesome, and I really appreciate all the efforts that you've done. So now that we've kind of covered your backstory, how about we take a little break here, and I'll invite you to a new meeting, and that way we can talk a little bit more about the ritual and the deeper meanings or the symbolism in Scottish ritual. This presentation was for public consumption, but for the next video that we plan on doing, the part 2, it will be private for Master Mason. So we'll definitely publish that in our group. So if you go to Facebook /Masonic Education, click our page, like it, Modern Working Tools, and then we could send an invite to you, or you could invite to join us on the Facebook group. Just send us a photo of your dues card or travel papers, or you could just inbox us and send us the credentials, and we can invite those to the group that want to watch this as well. So I'm going to end this here, and I'm going to send you a new email with a new link so we could continue on. Thank you so much. This is part one, Modern Working Tools, to be continued.
Right. See you soon.